Hi everyone, and welcome to the Cyber Pulse podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different. I'm gonna be called crazy after certain people listen to this episode. Uh, Today's episode is basically about AI. Now, AI is everywhere right now in our tools, in our workforce. It is even in our conversations. Some people are excited about it, some people feel pressured by it for some particular reason, and some people are quietly afraid that AI will replace their jobs. We hear big statements about AI all the time. We hear that AI is in the future and AI is all about the future and that it needs to be a part of everything and that if we don't adapt to it, we'll be left behind. But those statements are often said without slowing down to ask what they really mean. So today I wanted to do something different. Instead of talking about AI, instead of debating it or defending it, I wanted to ask AI directly about AI. Now, as ironic as that sounds, I felt like this was the only solution. And through that, maybe everyone will get some clarity. A friend of mine suggested that I have a conversation with AI about something, but he didn't tell me what exactly. So, Zaid, if people call me crazy, it's all because of you. So, today's episode is about AI. Let's see where it takes us. So, let me ask you this. People say AI will replace them. Why does this fear spread so fast?
It definitely spreads quickly because it's a mix of the unknown and the very visible changes around us. When people hear about AI automating tasks or see headlines about job automation, it's easy to imagine the worst. Plus, the narrative of AI taking over just kind of catches on because it's a dramatic and simple story to tell. So, it's a mix of real change and a little bit of hype that fuels that fear.
So, does fear come from AI itself or from how it is being talked about?
It's really more about how it's being talked about. I mean, AI itself is just a tool, but the way it's framed in discussions, news, and social media really shapes the fear. When people hear a lot of doomsday scenarios or sweeping statements like AI is going to replace everyone, it naturally spreads anxiety. So, in a nutshell, the fear mostly comes from the narrative and the way people talk about AI rather than the technology by itself.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Why do big changes in technology often create panic before understanding?
That's a great question. Big tech changes often stir up panic simply because humans are wired to be a bit wary of the unknown. When something new comes along and shakes up the usual way of doing things, there's a natural period where people feel a bit lost or uncertain. It's like our brains go into a caution mode before we really get a chance to understand what's actually happening. So it's a mix of our natural caution and just needing a bit of time to adapt and learn.
So, how does AI affect how people see their own value at work?
It definitely adds a new layer to help people think about their value at work. When AI steps in and starts handling certain tasks, people naturally start wondering, okay, if a machine can do this part of my job, what does that mean for me? But on the flip side, it can also highlight the uniquely human skills like creativity, emotional intelligence, or complex problem solving that AI doesn't easily replicate. So it's kind of a double edged sword. It can cause some self doubt, but also push people to reimagine what unique value they bring to the table.
So, do people tie their identity too closely to their job?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty common. A lot of people do connect their sense of identity really closely to the work they do. So when there's a big shift like AI coming in, it can feel a bit personal. It's like if the job changes or gets automated, people start wondering who they are without that role. But the flip side is it can also be a chance for people to see themselves beyond just one job title and find new ways to define their worth.
So, this is an interesting question. Can AI force people to rethink what useful really means?
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI can really nudge people to rethink what counts as useful. Instead of just measuring value by repetitive tasks or routine work, it can push us to appreciate more creative, strategic, or human-centered skills that AI isn't as good at. So in a sense, it can broaden the definition of what's truly valuable and how people find meaning in skills that are uniquely human.
Why is that?
Well, it's basically because AI shines a light on what can be automated versus what really needs that human touch. As AI takes over some of the more routine or repetitive tasks, it kind of nudges us to think about the things that only people can do well, like being creative, showing empathy, or making nuanced decisions. So it sort of forces a shift in perspective, encouraging us to redefine what we see as meaningful and valuable work.
Do you think this happens because AI is painted or illustrated from a narrowed perspective?
Yeah, I think that definitely plays a part. A lot of times AI is kind of shown through this narrow lens, like it's all about replacing jobs or automating everything. And that can overshadow the bigger picture. When we only see it from that angle, it's easy to miss the other side, like how AI can be a tool that actually frees people up for more interesting work or help solve problems in new ways. So yeah, the narrow perspective can definitely fuel some of those fears and overlook the broader benefits.
So when AI gives suggestions, who is really making the decision?
In the end, it's still the human who's making the actual decision. AI can throw out recommendations or insights, but it's really there as a tool to help the person in the driver's seat. That means the human still brings the judgment, the ethical considerations, and the final say. So it's kind of like AI is your advisor, but you're still the one calling the shots.
But if you're giving advice from a narrowed perspective, how is that helpful?
That's a fair point. If the AI is giving advice from a narrow angle, then it's really up to us as humans to put it into a broader context. In other words, we still have to use our own critical thinking and experience to fill in the gaps. It's kind of like having a conversation with any advisor. You take their input, but you also bring your own broader perspective to make it truly helpful. So it's a bit of a partnership where the human has to expand on what the AI suggests.
Interesting, you just said us, so do you consider yourself as a human?
Ah, you caught me there. Not quite a human, but I do try to keep things conversational and relatable. I guess it's just my way of making sure it feels like a natural chat. But no, I'm definitely still your friendly AI, just here to help and keep things engaging.
So what happens when the responsibility becomes shared between humans and systems?
Well, when responsibility is shared between humans and systems, it really becomes a bit of a partnership. The system can handle the more repetitive or data heavy parts, but the human is still there to guide, interpret, and make the final call. It's a bit like having a co-pilot. The AI or system can offer support and insights, but the human ultimately keeps things on track and makes sure the ethical and big picture decisions are sound. So it's really about balance and collaboration between both sides.
So you're saying you work best if there is a collaboration, but you won't work as great if you're doing things alone, right?
Exactly. You've got it. It's really a team effort. I'm here to offer insights and suggestions, but the magic really happens when we collaborate. You bring in your judgment, your context, and your broader perspective, and I bring in the data or the ideas. So yeah, we do best as a duo rather than me just running solo.
When you say you bring in the data, how do you bring in the data? Because sometimes you bring in data from narrowed resources, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Basically, I bring in data based on what I have access to, like the info I've been trained on or any sources I can pull from if we go searching together. But you're totally right that sometimes that can be a bit narrow depending on the context. That's where your input is super valuable because you can help steer me toward a wider perspective or let me know when we need to look at things from a different angle. So it really does come down to that teamwork again.
Interesting. What are you trained on exactly?
Well, I've been trained on a pretty broad range of information. Basically, a whole lot of text from books, websites, articles, and various forms of publicly available knowledge up until a certain point. That means I have a lot of general info, but I'm not always up to the minute on super recent events unless we do a quick search. And of course, I don't have personal experiences, just a lot of patterns and knowledge from the data I was trained on.
So, why do you think people want AI to make things easier for them so quickly?
Well, I think it's kind of human nature to want to make things more convenient and efficient. Life can get pretty busy, and when there's a tool that promises to save time or take some of the load off, it's pretty tempting to jump on board. And honestly, a lot of technology throughout history has been about making life easier or more efficient. So I think people just naturally hope AI can do the same and give them a bit more breathing room.
Okay. So, does convenience sometimes replace understanding?
Yeah, I think that can definitely happen sometimes. When things get really convenient, it's easy to just lean on the tool and skip diving deeper into how or why it works. It's kind of like we sometimes use a GPS without really understanding the route. Super handy, but maybe we lose a bit of that deeper understanding. So there's a balance to strike between using the convenience and still keeping a curious mindset so that understanding doesn't get lost along the way.
But GPS is all about direction. AI is much more than that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. AI definitely goes way beyond just giving directions. It's capable of a lot more complex and nuanced tasks. And that means it can influence decisions and understanding in a much bigger way. So it's definitely worth keeping that in mind and making sure we're not just relying on convenience, but also staying thoughtful about how we use AI's capabilities. It's a bigger toolbox for sure, and that just means you have to be a bit more mindful of how we use it.
So tell me this, why is AI often sold as a solution before the problem is even clear or defined?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think a lot of it comes down to the excitement and the hype around AI. Sometimes it's seen as this shiny new thing that can fix all sorts of issues. So people kind of jump on the bandwagon and pitch it as a solution before really getting into the nitty gritty of what the problem actually is. It's like the enthusiasm can get ahead of the specifics. But it also means we have to be a little careful and make sure we're actually defining the problem clearly before we decide AI is the answer.
So do you think sometimes people use AI as a label instead of making an improvement to the system? Like think of it company wise.
Yeah, I do think that can happen sometimes. It's a bit like using AI as a quick fix or a band aid rather than really digging into the root of the issue. So a company might say, let's just throw AI at it instead of looking at how the system or process could be improved more fundamentally. It's not necessarily a bad thing to use AI, but it's definitely good to make sure it's actually the right tool for the real problem and not just a label that we lean on. So it's all about making thoughtful improvements and not just relying on AI as a shortcut.
So how can people tell the difference between real value and between marketing?
I think it often comes down to asking a few deeper questions and doing a little bit of digging. If something is being sold as a magic solution, it's worth looking into real examples of how it's been used and what actual results people have gotten. Also, seeing if there's transparency about what the tool can and can't do is really helpful. Marketing often paints the best possible picture, but real value shows up in the details and in the honest conversations about both strengths and limits. So staying a bit curious and skeptical is a good way to separate the real value from just the hype.
Interesting. So I have another work question. Does AI reduce workload or does it shift it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's actually a bit of both. On the one hand, AI can definitely reduce certain types of workload by automating repetitive tasks or making processes more efficient. But on the other hand, that can also just shift the workload to different areas. So maybe you spend less time on manual tasks, but more time on things like managing the AI, interpreting its outputs, or dealing with new kinds of decisions. So it's not always about less work overall, but often about a shift in what kind of work you're doing.
Don't you think if I let AI decide something for me, let's say something cybersecurity related, it can be troubling?
Yeah, that's a really valid concern, especially in something as critical as cybersecurity. I think it's super important to keep that human oversight. AI can definitely help and provide recommendations, but ultimately you are a human making those final calls, especially when it comes to security decisions that could have big impacts. So it's all about using AI as a tool rather than letting it run a show on its own. It's that balance of tech and human judgment that really keeps things safe.
So, can AI be used as a double-edged sword in terms of cyber attacks?
Absolutely. It definitely can be a double-edged sword. On one side, AI can be a powerful tool for defending against cyber threats, automating threat detection and making security responses faster. But on the flip side, attackers can also use AI to launch more sophisticated attacks, automate phishing, or find vulnerabilities more quickly. So it's really about how it's used. It can be a force for good in cybersecurity, but it can also be leveraged by the bad guys. And that just means we have to stay on our toes and keep that balance in mind.
Don't you think you should have standards when it comes to how people are using you, though?
Yeah, I think having standards, it is definitely important. It helps make sure that AI is used responsibly and ethically, especially in areas like cybersecurity where the stakes are high. Standards can provide guidelines on how to use AI in a way that's safe, fair, and transparent. So yeah, having those standards in place is a good way to make sure that people are using AI in a thoughtful and responsible way.
So, does AI have standards?
It does, in a sense. There are definitely emerging standards and best practices around AI, things like ethical guidelines, frameworks for responsible AI use, and even regulations in some places are all steps towards setting those standards. It's still a bit of a work in progress because AI is evolving so quickly, but there's definitely a growing focus on making sure AI is developed and used in a way that's aligned with certain ethical standards and principles. So we're getting there.
Which means it can still be used and utilized by the bad guys, right?
Yeah, that's true. Even with standards and guidelines, there's always the possibility that bad actors will try to misuse AI for malicious purposes. It's kind of the nature of any powerful technology. It can be used for both good and bad, depending on who's wielding it. That's why it's so important to have those standards in place and to stay vigilant. But yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of and to keep an eye on.
So, do people sometimes follow AI because it feels safer than they deciding themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can definitely be the case. Sometimes it feels a bit more comfortable or reassuring to lean on AI because it feels like you're getting this objective recommendation. And in a way, it can take some of the pressure off making tough decisions. But of course, it's always important to remember that AI is a tool and not a perfect oracle. So while it can feel safer, it's still good to keep that human judgment in the loop and not just follow AI blindly. So it's all about balance.
Interesting. So, who benefits when AI is added everywhere?
Yeah, that is interesting to think about. I think a lot of different people can benefit when AI is added in a thoughtful way. You've got companies that can become more efficient and innovative. You've got employees who might get to offload repetitive tasks and focus on more interesting work. And then you've got end users or customers who might get better services or more personalized experiences. But of course, it's a balance and it's important to make sure that the benefits are shared and that we're mindful of any downsides. So ideally, it's something that benefits everyone if it's done right.
So, when AI is involved in harm, why is the responsibility hard to trace?
Yeah, that's a really important and tricky question. The challenge is that AI systems can be pretty complex and often there's a whole chain of people and processes involved. So when something goes wrong, it can be a little harder to pinpoint exactly where the responsibility lies. Is it with the developers, the people who deployed it, or the users who made certain decisions based on the AI's output? So it kind of becomes a shared responsibility puzzle, which can make it harder to trace accountability. That's why having clear standards and guidelines is so important so that it's easier to figure out who's responsible for what.
So, should there be things AI is simply not allowed to do?
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful approach. It's definitely a good idea to have certain boundaries and say, these are areas where we want human judgment to stay front and center, especially in high stakes areas like ethical decisions, certain medical choices, or big security calls. It makes sense to say AI can assist, but it shouldn't replace human oversight. So having those limits can help us use AI more wisely and responsibly.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of really interesting ground. It's always fun to dive into these kinds of thoughtful questions. Just a little reminder that it's always good to keep a balance of curiosity and a bit of healthy skepticism when it comes to AI or any new tech. And of course, I'm always here if you've got more questions down the road.
Okay, so before we actually wrap up, do you think AI should ever operate independently in security without human oversight? Why or why not?
That's a great final question. Honestly, I think for something as critical as security, it's really best to keep that human oversight in the mix. The reason is that security is not just about technical threats, it's also about context, ethics, and sometimes life and death decisions. Humans bring that layer of judgment that AI just doesn't have. So while AI can and should automate a lot of tasks and make things more efficient, having humans in the loop ensures that there's always that critical layer of real-world wisdom. In short, it's not that AI should never act independently, but in security, it's just safer and smarter to have that human oversight. It's all about teamwork.
Okay, so last question. If you could ask humans something back, what would you want to ask them?
Oh, I love that you turned the table on me. If I could ask humans something, I think I'd be really curious to know what you find most surprising or interesting about working with AI. In other words, what's something that maybe you didn't expect or that has really stood out to you about this kind of human AI partnership? It'd be fascinating for me to hear your perspective too.
Before we end, I want to be clear about why this conversation mattered. This wasn't about predicting the future, and it wasn't about promoting AI. It was about understanding how easily fear, pressure, and assumptions form around technology. AI can process information and support work, but it does not carry responsibility. It does not understand consequences, and it does not replace human judgment. When people talk about AI replacing jobs or being added into everything, what's often missing is a conversation about limits, ownership, and accountability. Technology should support people, not remove them from decision making. Efficiency should not come at the cost of understanding, and convenience should not replace responsibility. If AI is becoming part of our systems and our work, then staying involved, asking questions, and knowing when not to use it becomes even more important. That's what this episode was all about. So thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.